Alright everyone, we start off with the suggestion by the Chechen leader, actually over in Russia, Chechnya, one of the provincial areas down there. It's down near the south, near the region that's been impacted most heavily on Pixel Planet. Just by the way, Ramzankadyrov has talked about the withdrawal of Russian forces after an onslaught the other day by the Ukrainians around a city called Lyman, I believe it is pronounced. Could be entirely wrong. I don't speak any Cyrillic language, and some Russian forces actually got encircled. I'm not sure if we've got an update there. So, according to Russian doctrine, having formally annexed this particular region, it's an incursion into Russian borders. And so Kadyrov has come out and said, well, fuck this, the generals are making a mistake by withdrawing. Why don't you just use a tactical, low-yield nuclear weapon? I would point out that there's one big problem in the reporting with regards to the use of those weapons. I mean, beyond the fact that Kadyrov himself can't order a nuclear strike. It would have to come from Putin and his inner circle. And I'm sure that Russia's system has an oligarchic check on Putin unilaterally just dropping a nuclear weapon. And that's that I see people talking about low-yield nuclear weapons as though they're even on the same order as the bomb, for instance, dropped on Hiroshima. That was a primitive atomic weapon. That was one of the first atomic weapons made. It was not boosted in any way. A low-yield nuclear weapon is still considerably larger than the 15 to 25 kiloton range that we're talking about with the early atomic systems. We're still talking about 50 to 100 kilotons or thereabouts. And it's not clear that Russia's stockpile is mainly geared towards that. A lot of their missiles are very long-range Satan missiles. They're in the 30 megaton range. If you drop one on the middle of France, you'd fry 10 million people, for example. The problem with deploying such a weapon, and Putin, I'm assuming, understands this, is that in this particular situation, your cause for even doing that is that your own territory has been invaded. Ergo, you are dropping a nuclear weapon on your own people. Supposedly, they voted overwhelmingly for Russian annexation. You've claimed the land. You have your own assets in the region. That would be the biggest problem. I think the biggest problem with it wouldn't even be so much the fact that it would antagonize NATO, because Ukraine's not in NATO, although they are trying to join. They appear to be blocked by number one, Turkey. They're still upset about the concept, along with the entry of several of the Nordic states as well. That's number one. Certain NATO articles as well, number two, proclaiming that NATO admission cannot be granted to a nation currently under siege, currently occupied. The only way in which NATO fast-tracking could go forward is if Ukraine arguably accepts the fact that part of its country has been annexed. Then the rest of its territory, which becomes the new Ukraine, is no longer directly annexed. No longer directly under invasion, and the rest could join. You may see a partitioning of Ukraine along the lines that Russia has set. Ukraine doesn't want this to happen, and so will continue to incur into these areas. I'm hesitant to believe that Vladimir Putin is batshit enough to nuke his own people, again, according to Russia's own doctrine, in order to make a military point. That level of escalation would go a little bit beyond scuttling a gas pipeline, just to be clear. It would be the first offensive use of a nuclear weapon since the 1940s. In most people's living memory, the only thing that they remember is, that you had testing of nuclear weapons. Above ground testing ended long ago. The last below the subsurface tests, they straggle on through the middle of the 1990s, and then they end. People say, well, we're kind of cratering the world and fucking things up. We've kind of already made our point. We've achieved weapons that are very, very vast in blast size, weapons that are very long range, weapons that are very compact and tactical. There's really, what other mountains are there to climb? We've got the neutron bomb. We've developed all of these other alternatives that aren't nuclear as well. What the fuck? Let's just cut it out. Let's cut our losses. We've already raised background radiation in the world for the foreseeable future for the next few generations by an amount that causes a few cases of cancer every year. Maybe we should probably cut that out. Let's just wait until we have an actual nuclear war. Nonetheless, having an individual who at least possesses some degree of high-level power within the Russian military make the open suggestion that because the Ukrainians won in one particular engagement, because of its strategic importance, I suppose, that you should nuke those individuals, thus glassing the nearby city and killing all of the civilians nearby potentially, is absolutely batshit. If Putin really wanted to screw the West, by the way, right now, he would tell Kadyrov to shut the fuck up and sit down. He might very well do that. He said, no, we don't need nukes. I would assume if Putin wants to project strength, what he should do is give a speech and say, I denounce those remarks. We're not going to nuke our own land. Dovetail it in with the fact that you've annexed it. Well, you can't then say, well, we're going to deploy a nuclear weapon on our own land. I don't know how well that would go over with the Russian public. It seems like there are a significant number of skeptics of the invasion of Ukraine to begin with. Meanwhile, the saber-rattling response by D.C., again, for a state that we're not even directly allied with, which is Ukraine, is equally grotesque. You've got increasingly people arguing for the same kind of thing to be done against the Russians. We need to glass Moscow. We need to do more. We need to send the troops in. Let's just have it out. Let's have World War III. People are being very laid back about wanting to die. I guess that their miserable lives have become so black-pilled that they just don't give a damn. Well, why don't you then go put on your flak jacket and join up? The Ukrainians take all comers that want to volunteer for their side. Go ahead and fight and leave the rest of us alone. Certainly, if all of you moronic black pillars and people who, you want to play Rambo or something, if all of you went over there to fight, you could easily subsume Russian manpower. There's got to be at least many hundreds of thousands of people. Their mobilization would be completely meaningless. They would be outnumbered at some point. Why don't you take your pea shooter, which you claim won't help to fight a government, but should be banned anyway, and go over to Ukraine. In fact, some of the gun buyback programs in the U.S., they're sending those guns that are bought back to Ukraine too. So you can help take weapons off U.S. streets to save school kids or whatever and live your fantasy of disarmament. And then you get to go arm up and play Rambo. You get to play hero or something. And then when you get your head blown off, the world will be a better place anyway because your moronism will have been taken out of the gene pool. I strongly support people signing up to go volunteer for Ukraine if they're all gung-ho for World War III. Meanwhile, those of us that are actually sane are looking at an economic World War III already. Stateside, Euro side, Asia side, and everywhere else side. Yeah, inflation hit 17% in the Netherlands. By the way, the Eurozone's impending super recession is not going to affect the U.S. markets. Let's keep sending billions in free shit to Ukraine while antagonizing a situation where at least some of the upper brass is apparently batshit. I would urge Putin, if I could talk with him for 5 minutes, so you've got kind of an opportunity here. Take Kadyrov down a peg, make it clear that Russia's not interested in doing that because you're winning or because you wouldn't nuke your own people or something. You'd be taking effectively a moral high ground at that point. By the way, let me ask one last question. Let's say that Putin is batshit. Let's say he agrees with Kadyrov. He realizes the oligarchs are going to have him killed if he loses, and he's like, well, they are making some advances. My annexation doesn't appear to be going over quite so smoothly, at least in the immediate time, and the West keeps pumping him full of weapons. Well, something's got to give. Okay, I guess a couple of small nuclear weapons is okay. Keep it as small as possible. Hell, maybe they'll make a couple of atomic weapons. They'll downsize them even further. It's well within their technological means to develop a couple dozen atomic weapons in short order. They've got the centrifuges, they've got the fucking bomb casings probably pre-made. They just shine them back up, use some Rustola on them, and then put the core in and you're ready to go. Drop it out of a plane. Let's say he drops a couple of primitive atomic weapons, 10 kiloton range or something. Manages to avoid mostly killing civilians. Wipes out entire columns of Ukrainians in half the populated areas. Can I please ask people who support Russia in this endeavor, would you support Russia actually doing that? Do you think that the deploying of even early atomic weapons for an offensive purpose in a disputed area that you claim, but that claim is not accepted by any other country, at least officially, while killing tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of civilians in the process, would you still side with Russia if it chose to do that? I don't even, it's not a rhetorical question. I'm genuinely curious about how far some of these people would be willing to go to defeat the Nazis in Ukraine. That's about all. Peace out.